Good afternoon. My name is Anne Lemestre, and I am the head of UNESCO office in Côte d'Ivoire. I am very, very honored to be the moderator of a session of the African Dialogue series dedicated to sustainable peace for development, factoring in history. We are, I think all of us, grateful to the organizers of the African Dialogue series to give us this opportunity to make an appeal to all Africans to revisit their roots and to reshape their mindset, to be inspired to build a new narrative thanks to Africa's history, culture, and heritage. As you all know, the African Union Summit declared arts, culture, and heritage, building the Africa we want, as a theme of the year 2021 to celebrate, of course, the diversity, the wealth of the African culture in all its dimensions. It is more than welcome, as despite the COVID pandemic, things are moving quite fast here in Africa with a solid hope to build back better after this pandemic. We were all amazed, I think, a few weeks ago by the grandiose Pharaoh's Golden Parade that goes much further than the mere relocation of a collection, but rather as a demonstration of the greatness of this unique civilization and Africa's soft power. We are also witnessing numerous claims by African countries for return of movable cultural property of major national significance for their cultural identity. Art, culture, heritage are not only a promising sector of the creative economy, they are also intangible assets for social cohesion and sustainable peace when valued, shared, and understood through the lens of history. Taking the opportunity of the African Union Year, UNESCO promotes to the general African public its general history of Africa that you know, which is a monumental work written from the perspective of Africans themselves. We try to promote it through attractive means such as movies, cartoons, comic strips, and encourages strongly governments to integrate it into the curriculum of the schools of Africa. In this regard, to give you another example, in Côte d'Ivoire, for example, UNESCO is working on the promotion of the often forgotten small kingdoms and interethnic alliance as a tool of prevention and management of today's conflicts. And I can tell you, it works. So let's see how our distinguished panelists will guide us on this reflection on how history, culture, heritage can help us in building peace in the continent and writing a new narrative for Africa from Africa. And without further ado, let me introduce our first panelist, Professor Shahid, Wanda. Good afternoon to you. You are a doctor of philosophy in social anthropology from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and you are currently professor in critical humanities and decoloniality at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, director of the School of African and Gender Studies, Anthropology and Linguistics. Your current research now are on social life of museums, urbanization, migration, social dynamics in cities, and a survey on the perception of communities towards traditional authorities in Itekewini municipality. And you are a member of numerous numerous professional associations. I will not cite them all, but I have kept the Association of Anthropologists in Southern Africa, International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences, the member of International Council of Museum, ICOM, and member of the Commonwealth Associations of Museum. So your CV is really impressive. So with your authorization, I'm going to stop here and move to the first question to you. Could you please explain to us how you conceptualize the long, deep, complicated history of Africa's entanglement with the rest of the world? What are the benefits of distinguishing between endogenous African history and cultural heritage from those imposed from outside influences? And how can this distinction be used to showcase African identity, to foster economic growth, and above all, to maintain peaceful Africa? Professor.
Thank you very much, Anne. And thank you to the organizers of these African Dialogue series. And thank you to my fellow panelists on today. So one of the most enduring misrepresentations of Africa is that it's a dark continent, full of wars and tragedies. Nothing to offer except its mineral and environmental resources to the world. It has no history, no civilizations, no unfolding to a brighter future, and hence enslavement and extraction of its resources is justified. Of course, most Africans, not uncharacteristically, dispute this view. This is not true, as the UN History of Africa series shows. But this view is present, sometimes in its most sophisticated view that acknowledges a glorious African past, or at times in its more horrific racist view, most recently expressed by the former US President Donald Trump. Generally, Africa is presented as receiving the gifts of others, of knowledge, of religion, of science, technology, of cultural advancement. In a word, modernity arrives from the outside. In reply, some Africans have argued that our engagement with the world has led to its arrested development, while others have stated that national liberation movements in the late 19th and 20th centuries created new kinds of progress to be made, and that she shall flourish in the post-colonial period. And indeed, since the mid-20th century, as has been noted often enough by various agencies of the UN system, the cultural heritage of the continent has come to the fore. It has led to the recognition of those intangible aspects of African civilizations, the great diversity of its languages and cultures, has influenced the politics of identity and inscribed recognition of diversity and differences as human rights. These are not small achievements. Yet it dislocates these from two things. Firstly, the wider network and the context of social relationships on a world scale. That is, it locks everything into local parochialisms. And secondly, some of the most fundamental levers of economic and political power exist outside of the continent, sometimes along the grain of the most powerful polities inside the continent, and sometimes against powerful influences from the outside. The way that I address sustainable peace is through history and heritage, to be understood in the long, the deep, and the complicated way in which Africa has become entangled with the world from about the 10th century BC to the present, This entanglement is part of the rise of major civilizations that stretch from China across Africa and into Europe. Here, I take the Indian Ocean as emblematic of what I think needs to be done to encourage a more historical approach to culture in general as meaningful for citizens, and more especially the overlapping and multiple expressions of very specific cultures and heritages in Africa. We could take West Africa and the Mediterranean worlds, or the links between the hinterlands that stretch outwards towards the oceans. Whichever region one chooses, it is an attempt to bring the historical depth of the continent's peoples and the variety of its polities, its many connections to the rest of the world, together with interpenetrative influences, the experiences, and the details of similarity and dissimilarity. It tries to do this in a broad way possible, without losing focus on what are the ingredients that of power, of place, and of people and their mobility that have shaped African societies as distinctive, but at the same time as part of many world systems. In this way, we can begin to disentangle those influences in the various degrees, the various kinds, and the various periods, and we are able to distinguish between those that are endogenous to the continent and its local manifestations from those that are imposed. Most importantly, what arises or emerges from this world entanglement is what is distinctive of the continent from the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And can you tell us how we can better understand this long history and diversity of the continent? What would you recommend in that sense?
One of the central features of this many centuries of interaction has been the mobility of groups of people who trade and perform labor through various forms of exchanges in goods, cloth or grain, sometimes financial services such as providing credit, but includes the capturing, the buying and selling of slaves, of indentured labor, but also labor on local inland communities. This labor ranges from being soldiers or to working on prestigious goods such as gold, silver, or even ivory. In these exchanges, of course, what is a prestigious good for one group of people in a polity might not be the same for someone in a different part of, say, the Indian Ocean. For example, Chinese ceramics found on the coast, on the East Coast, and the interior of Africa may be about the exchange for gold or ivory on a regional core periphery axis, but it must also be about the organization of local extraction, which involves local producers, local political authorities, the tributes, the taxes, the justification in terms of political allegiances, kingship solidarities, alliances through marriage, religious domination, and other forms of hegemonic ritual and cultural practices. It must also be about the rejection of such organizations, which might initiate conflict, and the remaking of those internal external alliances, and sometimes new polities. Studies of trade and exchanges must be of necessity also the political, the economic, the religious, and the cultural, ideological dimensions, both internal to the relevant level of political organization and the external influences in which such exchange networks operate. Some of the crucial examples will be from the most important villages, towns, and cities that are part of a series of routes that make up these trade networks, these exchange networks, how these merged, how these adapted or assimilated or were influenced by new cultural practices or their rejection. These differences in conceptions of the commodities, what local people think of them and what people on the outside think of them, compels a much deeper reflection on how such commodities and how their cultural and symbolic values are constructed, how this is conceived in exchange, and what role that plays in the multitude of exchanges that actually takes place. Most importantly, these exchanges include ideas of knowledge, of religious practices, and various other kinds of practices, including cultural practices such as weddings, age-grade ceremonies, practice related to gender, to age, to skills. Could be skills such as navigation, technology, how we think of plants and animals, and what other forms of gift exchanges take place. These cultural manifestations should not be thought of something that is added on to the commodity exchanges or the trade perspective. These are part of the lives of people. They are intertwined. So the multitude of exchanges presupposes the diversity of peoples, their cultures, their migrations. These kinds of exchanges in turn have been linked in their varying degrees of intensity and of density to various places and peoples throughout the Indian Ocean and their hinterland. In fact, some researchers are now beginning to talk of an Afro-Eurasian world system beginning in the 10th century BC, right up till the onset of European colonialism. The modern system comes into being with colonialism, but is still predicated on the mobility of people, ideas, cultures, and religions. In doing so, it acknowledges the differential importance and power of groups or classes of people in human settlements and their role in the trade and exchange at the local level of people's own polities, their own identities, which affect their social relationships in their various respective settlements. These could be hamlets, these could be villages, cities, towns, chiefdoms, and states. Crucial to a historically informed approach to culture and heritage in the present is that these exchange relationships are forms of reciprocity and participation, informed by historical precedent and sanctioned by various value systems that emerge over time. By reviewing the current status of research and conducting new original research, we can better come to understand the emergence of cultural practices that are often called traditional and see them as under constant change, not as unchanging survivals of the past. This will allow us in Africa to better interpret our own experiences with the rest of the world. And it will allow us to better have a sense of our place in the world rather than being seen as perpetually underdeveloped. It focuses on how we embody the production, the control, and the distribution of ideas, religions, technology, goods, services, and why some of these are accumulated, why they're exchanged, and the differential cultural status and the meaning we attach to them in their localities and in the wider network of these exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shahid. I think you have well demonstrated that culture is highly dynamic, and I thank you very much for all the examples of migration, exchange, trade networks you were mentioning, which have shaped value system and cultural practices, and explaining also the diversity of the continent, of the culture in the continent. Thank you very much, Professor. We will come back to you a little bit later. I'm going to move now to Mrs. Fatma Mustafa Abdelaziz. Good afternoon. You are the Deputy Director of Children's Center for Civilization and Creativity, Child Museum, and you hold a master degree in museum studies, and you are currently a PhD researcher in heritage conservation and museum studies. Congratulations. And what is important in our conversation today is that you have 20 years of experience of the world of the field of developing heritage, interactive exhibition and educational programs. And I know you are the only member of a committee developing children museum exhibition. So you are part of really numerous international institution, including UNESCO. You have been part of ICROM, Sharjah, and British Council, and also African Union advisor for heritage education. And I think this is really pertinent for our today conversation. And what we would like to ask you, Madam Mustafa Abdelaziz, is really, according to you, what steps the African governments are taking to formulate educational policies and programs that educate youth on African history and culture, that could help foment a strong African identity for, of course, African economic growth and peace in Africa. What steps should be taken by this government?
Thank you, dear.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for you, dear Anne, and thank you for the organization. Thanks for all the panelists with us today. Let me first quote Professor Shahid. We take for granted the desire for peace, but we to reach that is a lot of a step should be taking on this to provide good quality of education to preserve our heritage. To ensure the African governments formulate education policies and programs that educate youth on Africa, on African history and culture. Those steps could be I think the African governments should review with all their laws related to safeguarding and preserving heritage to be in accordance with the international convention. They should do an effective relationship or partnership with civil society and private identities. Governments cannot work alone to safeguard and preserve the heritage. Integrating, safeguarding, and preservation of cultural heritage within their strategic plan, teaching and integrating heritage within the formal education. Many countries did that, such as Australia, European Union. They believe that improved education policies it's mandatory to reach the sustainable development, as we all know. Also, government on African countries should make or should sure of capacity building for personnel in the field of heritage education. They also should secure a specific budget for heritage education. This budget can be secured through a good use of heritage, away from over commercialization of this heritage. They also can secure budget by effective partnership or international assistance. If we sign for, the conventions, as you know, they can secure a good international assistance for all the activities related to educating children. I have many experience with UNESCO and the international identities worked on educate children the importance and the value of heritage. We did a lot of toolkits, we did a lot of maps for heritage sites and heritage elements. We did a specific map for many World Heritage sites, not only located the heritage site on the map, but also located the intangible cultural heritage elements, which should be safeguarded because it's our living heritage, as you know. So there's a lot to be done from the governmental side to safeguard and preserving heritage for the new generation, to transmit this heritage with the proper way for the new generation, because they will formulate the heritage of Africa in the upcoming years. Also, they will be the leader of this heritage in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mustafa. It appears that we may have lost the moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do hear you.
Yes, it appears we may have lost the moderator. But I will just follow up on the question that she had asked you.
Yes.
Until she logs back on.
Okay.
Yeah, the follow-up question is, what could be the role of African cultural and heritage institutions, such as museums, for example, to promote peace for sustainable development, in particular in the context of building back better during this post-COVID-19 pandemic? What would you suggest? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Cultural institutions such as museums play an important role in supporting peace education, enhancing opportunities for long life learning, and preserving cultural heritage. Heritage education for children and youth comes as an important part for safeguarding and preserving this heritage. During the corona pandemic, as we all know, children in Africa and all over the world did not go to school for the past 2 years. And here comes the role of culture institution. From my point of view, education of heritage and raising awareness about its values are not less important than its restoration. While we are take care of tangible and intangible heritage by restore or safeguard this heritage, ignoring raising the awareness and educate children about this heritage. If we review many of school or formal education curriculum in Africa or in many African countries, we will face you could say lack of presenting heritage within this curriculum. So many culture institutions such as museums often make unplanned efforts to provide heritage education. Most of these efforts towards tangible cultural heritage based on the artifacts displayed in this museum. Here's come an important question. When will African culture institution pay attention to display or safeguard the living African heritage? We have to reconsider presenting of the intangible cultural heritage, which is very rich in Africa, to children and youth, and move away from the narrow local scope to include the African skull and focus on the common cross-border heritage for sustainable peace and sustainable development for the whole African countries. Because as we know, for example, the living heritage for Nubian that shared between Egypt and Sudan. The Nubian people lived between even and Sudan, and they participate the same heritage. Bagara and Abala, as we know, they between Sudan and Chad and many African countries, and they share the same heritage. So the heritage, cross-border heritage, can be one of the factors of sustainable peace for sustainable development in Africa. Also, museum as a non-profit educational institution can do a lot in this regard. They can be a community museum. We have a wonderful project called Western Sudan Museum as a community museum. We worked for 3 museums in 3 different regions in Sudan, for example, in Kordofan, in Darfur, and in Durman. We worked how this museum can play an initial role for safeguarding and preserving and uniting the community of Sudan by sharing the same participation, by sharing the same history. So if we take also Niala in Darfur, one of the most disputed region, not only in Africa, but in the whole world. This museum right now working in educating children the value of peace. They trying to raise peace in children's mind. So non-formal educational institution can do a lot. Also museum can do a lot. All cultural institutions should work together to promote peace for narrative from Africa and for Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Mustafa. It appears that the moderator is having internet issues, and so she's still trying to log on. You have really gone into detail about the importance of educating our youth on the importance of our heritage and the usage of museums to facilitate this education. I want to thank you for your intervention. At this point, I will move on to Mr. Shaso. I'll just give a brief background based on the CV that you've provided. Mr. Olasupo Sasho is a senior advocate of Nigeria and a partner at Africa Law Practice. He is, which is a leading commercial law firm in Nigeria. It is well known for his representation in multinationals and state sovereigns in many disputes in the Supreme and Appellate Courts of Nigeria. Mr. Shaso is a notable investigative historian and author. He has served as chairman of the Lagos History Committee that produced the seminal work, The History of Lagos from Earlier Times. After serving in law enforcement and public administration as Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice of Lagos State between 2007 and 2011, he made more time to do a lot of research and writing, resulting in the award-winning narrative history books called Possessed, A History of the Crown Colony of Lagos. He also wrote King and Colony, which is a short history of British possession of Lagos. And he wrote a book, A Platter of Gold, Making of Nigeria, between 1906 and 1960. Mr. Shashaw is currently the chairman of the Nigeria Advisory Board of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council and member of its International Advisory Board. He is also the chairman of the Nigerian Commonwealth Walkaway Committee and the chairman of the Lagos Theatre Festival Foundation. Now, with that very good bio, Mr. Shashaw, I will proceed to ask you the first question that was intended for you, and that is, Africa has a long and rich history, which is very often unknown. As you know, UNESCO launched the General History of Africa, seen from the perspective of Africans themselves, to rectify widespread ignorance about Africa's history. Please explain how you understand African history and how this can help validate our culture and identity, and how this intangible asset can be better utilized to create the necessary conditions for soft power in Africa. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, David. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. I feel honored in being asked to speak with such decorated experts. I'd also like to thank the initiators of the African Dialogue Series. It's a much needed initiative, particularly to bring issues of African identity into the fore. I'm very happy to talk about the General History of Africa project, which was initiated by the UNESCO several decades ago. It was both innovative at the time and a recognition of the impact of history in creating the Pan-African objective of identity, which was much needed then, as speakers before me have said. Little was given by way of credence to an African history. We were assumed not to have one, and we were assumed that if we had one at all, it contributed nothing to the global historical experience. But we now know that that's no longer true. As great as the GHA is in promoting that positive African identity, it's very important now that we use this identity for productivity and progress. Because I believe that the strength of Africa's future is increasing its productivity. And its identity is a crucial element of that attainment. Saying it now might sound a bit obvious, but honestly, the policymakers across the African continent, and I dare say many other parts of the world, but Africa particularly, seem not to pay much attention to the intangible assets worth of Africa. Africa is often described in terms of its natural resources. It's described in terms of its infrastructure gap and the need to bridge that infrastructure gap from what is called created capital. Very little emphasis is paid to its intangible assets. And we now know that on a global sphere, if you were to calculate the world's intangible assets, it would be in excess of $500 trillion, whereas its natural assets would not come anywhere close. So we also need to reframe policymakers and people in leadership of government to making them understand that intangible assets are the strength of every nation, and therefore the collection of nations on the African continent. Having said that, to relate it back to the GHA that was mentioned in the question, the General African History Initiative is by no means a small venture. It was a pioneering work. But I feel that there is much need to localize its implementation, to localize its effect, and to ensure that it reaches the street level, the grassroots, if you might. For instance, I like to cite the example of Kenya, that is now known to be developing methods to mainstream the GHA into its teacher curriculum, which is extremely laudable. But there's still several African countries that don't even have history as a compulsory feature in their schools. And I think that once we can reverse that trend, the implementation of GHA and such other initiatives as to strengthening the understanding and worth of African identity from a very young age, because that's where you will find the leaders of the next couple of decades. That certainly needs to be done. And from a continental point of view, the African Union should be supported to join up with the United Nations and having a more institutional collaboration to ensure that this local approach, I use the word localism because many African nations still feel largely detached when it comes to on-the-street policy making from conventions and treaties. So we need to make sure that this is felt at the community level. So a systematic, deliberate and conscious use of history in African policymaking and in the social economic interaction on a continental basis will have an enormous impact. So, on the point, I'd like to say that policymakers and leaders in government need to recharacterize heritage and history to become tools of national development, not just items of academic interest and intellectual discourse. These are tools of development that need to be employed to increase the productivity, and in productivity there lies the future of Africa. History is heritage and culture, and the bridge between them are very essential to make this achievement possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Shaso. You also mentioned this concept of soft power. Is it possible you can elaborate on this soft power and how it can help breed good leadership on the African continent, to deal with the plight of circumstances that the continent is facing? I also see that the moderator is back online, and so she will continue. But if you could just elaborate on the issue of soft power and how that breeds good leadership in Africa. Over to you, Mr. Shaso.
Well, yeah, I spoke about intangible assets, and if you recall, the intangible assets are clearly now identified as the bridges to soft power that can give you influence, as opposed to weapons and guns and other items of strategic dominance. The power to be able to influence people is inherent in your identity. And I think as far as the leadership is concerned, as I said, there needs to be a lot of emphasis on that from the leadership level, because that's where the policy-making steps are taken. If you look at Africa from the conflict management point of view, you will find that a lot of the conflicts that have pervaded Africa over the years have caused it to regress and not be able to produce that level of productivity. And then if you're able to characterized soft power in terms of an intangible asset, and therefore locate history in this function, you will find that if we can ensure that histories and heritage and culture studies and the understanding of our neighbors and our communities is increased, it'll ensure that conflict management is done as a priority and prior to actual conflict itself. And that way we'll be able to use it to neutralize and therefore bring more peace and stability. So I think my short answer to how it can be used is to get the recognition of the value of soft power through these intangible assets called history, culture, heritage in the leadership. We will be able to deploy it so that we can influence ourselves in Africa and influence the global order to suit African objectives. I mean, if you're just looking at the normal everyday conflicts that pervade Africa, establishment of boundaries or borders or self-determination, these issues are easily addressed by constant contact and dialogue between communities at the local level, states, and on the continental level, understanding each other's history and heritage and culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shashor. Very interesting point of view on the soft power and the leadership it can create and how to influence the global conversation. And also the global recognition. So thank you for that. And thank you also for your very kind words about UNESCO General History Project. In Kenya, it is very successfully, I would say, integrated into the school curriculum. And I think this is a good example to follow. So thank you very much on that. Without further ado, we are going to move to our last panelist, Mr. Charles Akibode. Good afternoon, Charles. Hope you're well. You are a researcher at the Institute of Cultural Heritage in Capo Verde. I know you well for years because you are also a UNESCO consultant for the inscription of numerous African sites. Ciudad de Bella in Capo Verde, Grand Bassam here in Côte d'Ivoire. Everyone knows you here. Banza Congo in Angola, and you have been involved also in the file, the preparation of the file for the genocide memorial in Rwanda, and also the one of the Tarrafal concentration camp in Capo Verde. So you are a member of several associations and including an active member of the International Scientific Committee of the Slave Route, and you are the mentor of the third round of the UNESCO periodic reporting exercise for African World Heritage, which is a very important exercise for all Africa. And you are the formal cultural advisor to several ministers of culture in Africa. So, Charles, you are working on all these World Heritage sites, and you know that UNESCO has designated 93 World Heritage sites properties in Africa for their unique cultural, natural values, and I imagine you know most of them, considering your experience. And I would like to know what is the impact of conflict and instability on Africa's culture and heritage, and how can we leverage this rich culture to resolve and prevent conflict? Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, and hello everybody. I'm so happy to be here between you. And I was saying to Anne Lemaire that I will be so happy to speak in French because I want to share with you a lot of concepts, but it seems to me that it's not allowed. And I beg your pardon, because I'm going to try to see how I can translate some concepts. And thank you, Anne. And if you see today on the World Heritage site have more than 1,000 sites inscribed in the World Heritage site. Unfortunately, Africa have only 8% of the site in the World Heritage site. But what is sad is that in the site in danger, you have 17 sites in danger, and in the site of UNESCO, we have for the World Heritage Site 35 sites in danger. Africa have around 40% of the site in danger, and unfortunately, only 8% of sites inscribed in the World Heritage. But you know what is important? You will see that in Africa, when you have some conflict, the more sites you can see in the site of the way in the country where we have conflict. In Africa, we have a lot of conflict. But from my point of view, you have to see how the population are fighting in order to preserve their site. If you see in 2012 in Bamako, in Mali, we have the mausoleum of Tombouctou. It was destroyed by the jihadists. But what we see that the local population was here in order to safeguard the books, the old books in the museum, and also they was trying to see what they can safeguard. And in 2017, tried to reconstruct the museum, but it was the work of the local population. And that's why what is important in order to save the conflict is to work with the local population. Another thing, what is important, we have one of the great sites in Uganda is the Tombs of Katsubi. And the Katsubi was destroyed by a fire, one of the bigger fires in the World Heritage Site in Africa. And we fight to see how we can reconstruct the site in Buganda, in Katsubi, and in Uganda. And it was only by the traditional knowledge of the local population. What is important to say is that if you want to safeguard, if you want to have a very good impact, what we can do in order to resolve and prevent conflict in Africa is so important to work with human, local people, and community, local community. That's why the convention, the new convention of the orientation, the guideline of the orientation are working very well in order to see if we just want to prevent conflict in the World Heritage Site, you have to work with the local community.
Thank you very much, and precisely that was this is totally, you have anticipated my second question, which was concerning unleashing this potential. So how do we do, in fact, to involve these communities being within or being around World Heritage Sites, in fact, for them to play a role in sustainable peace or prevention of conflicts and conservation of heritage at the same time? Do you have a recipe for that?
Yes, what is so important is to see how we can turn better the life of the local people who's working there. One of the first things you have to do when you work in the World Heritage Site, you have to take into account the life of people who's living around or inside of the site. The second thing, we have to work with people in order to put them in the beginning of the processes of inscription of the goods of the site. The other thing, we have some technical vocabularies. That's why I was saying that I just want to speak it in French. You have the universal value. We have the exceptional universal value. In order to inscribe a site, the site have to have cultural significance and very exceptional, who's go beyond the history of the country. I just can give you an example. For example, Gorée, the universal value of Gorée is that Gorée is a memory of the Atlantic slave trade. And the local population, the local community just have to know some technical word we use, and we have to share it with them in some simple words, in some words so easy. The other thing, what is important, we have to work in some new economy, what I call the cluster, the cluster of economy about culture. You have to develop a cluster of economy about culture and create some cluster of products, of cultural product, of World Heritage Site. And you have to work about communication. You have to work on the communication. You have to work on a lot of things in order to empower the local community. And what is important, you have to work on the technology of traditional knowledge. In our tradition, we have a lot of technology that we have to reinforce in order to see that the local population will be so proud to see the local technology, the local knowledge, reinforce it. Yes, it's just the ideas. Unfortunately, I cannot explain some concept I have. It's some new concept about economy, but you will see. I will send you my work around it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charles Akibode. We understood that you were giving us some figures of the fact that Africa has more or less 9% of the World Heritage List, and this is not enough. It means it's underrepresented. And you flashed out also that most of them are inscribed on the World Heritage List on danger. We need to act on that, and we understand the very essential role of communities in preserving. But you really highlighted the fact that they are participating only if they have been involved since the beginning of the process of inscription of the World Heritage List, and that they would be able after to develop some local products for their local economy. So thank you very much for that. I think it was.
Excuse me, I was speaking about the convergence cluster about economy. Excuse me.
Yes. Okay. Convergence.
Yeah.
Cluster. Okay, cluster of economy. Yeah, that it can create. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for this very fascinating conversation we just had. We do remember that Professor Shahid Wanda was denouncing very, very rightly the dark image of the continent, and also you highlighted the need to get rid ourselves of the view that civilization were brought to Africa, and you called for an understanding for this long and complex history of Africa, with all its history of mobility, trade networks, and exchanging, and to have a more historical approach to culture. Mrs. Fatma Mostafa Abdelaziz, you stated something that strikes me, which is really that heritage education is even more important than heritage restoration. And in fact, it's very close to what Charles Akibode is saying. In fact, investing in humans is more profitable, in fact, for the safeguarding of culture. And it has a bigger impact from what we understand. And we understood also from you that the African Museum have a role to play, and they could contribute, in fact, to peace. For example, not only by displaying objects at museum, but also to display and to explain living African heritage, and you try to demonstrate that this living African heritage, which is not enough shown, we could say, connects several regions together, which is quite interesting in terms of not only communication but cooperation and peace from this point of view. I can tell you that I can't agree more, because I'm thinking that even oral traditions are shared by several countries and several regions. And I have noted that, for example, the great Malian writer and historian Amadou Hampâté-Bâ, who has been recollecting oral traditions from all Western Africa, in fact, has demonstrated that most of the stories were common from all the regions. So, and there is a common understanding on this. So thank you very much. If I may, if we still have time, I may ask you one question, at least a last word. How do you think we could support African governments to put forward relevant policy initiatives that would enjoy history and culture to politics, that would even enable political leaders to create a conducive, participatory environment and to better manage cultural diversity for a peaceful Africa? How to support governments in this sense? Can I give you the floor, Professor Wanda?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. I've had once or twice I lost connection and had to reconnect. Of course, African governments need support. They need, already, if we adopt the idea that Kenya has already adopted and made the general history of Africa books as part of the school curriculum, will be a major advance. So that's one of the ideas that where African governments can quite easily play a role. I think that would be very, very important. And out of that, I think if as you said, these are made popular through cartoons, through videos, and so on, that would also be, and if these collectively through civil society request representatives of government to put in place these measures, I think it would work. It would create the conditions for us to be able to show how our very long history has a very great importance in the lives of people. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for highlighting the role of civil society. Excellent. Can I ask you the same question, Mrs. Mustafa? Fatma, dear Fatma?
Yes, thanks, Anne. I think the African culture organization, such we do right now, has an important role to play to provide governments of African countries with guidelines for how they can do preserve and safeguard the culture or natural heritage in all African, and to be sure that this provide them with the guidelines for all African countries, written by African people, not written by experts, written by the communities themselves, what they need to do for their heritage, what they need to save, what they need to participate of their heritage, not written by government or experts or anybody else. Experts should be involved, but also community should be involved. If we are talking about integration of the local community, of how they could preserve or safeguard their own heritage, they should know that they already have this heritage. They should know the value of the heritage they already have. So this is an important tool for culture organization to raise the awareness of the local communities, to make guidelines or database for to be a reference for all people working on preserving or safeguarding heritage in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Emphasizing more, the importance of local communities than experts. Thank you very much for this. Can I ask you the same question, Mr. Shashor? What can we support African governments in their initiative in this regard?
Mr. Shashor, we cannot hear you. Your mic, please.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. I said, in my opinion, the African governments do need help. I think you observe that at a macro level, we've got it absolutely right for Africa. The conventions, the treaties, the cultural conventions, from an institutional point, United Nations and African Union, we've got that absolutely right. But I think at the local level, at the national level, at the implementation stage, African states need a lot more support. Many of these international charters, they don't claim ownership of it locally. We need to design for them specific micro level programs that will help them implement the objectives of many of these laudable initiatives. And it needs to be monitored and progressively pursued by institutions. And I think very important to me from a practical point of view We need to also design ways in which states can begin to change their attitude towards historical archiving and keeping history and heritage. All too often, the budgeting and the attention to be paid to these things is either negligent or very little in observation. So I think it's important to do that. And I recognize what you said about oral history. Oral history is an important way in which you can, track what could otherwise be disappearing history and heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yes, to translate international charters into micro-level programs, yes, it makes sense. We should work into that direction. Mr. Charles Akibode, what could we do to support African governments to take policy initiatives? Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Akibode, your mic, please.
Say by the 5C. One of the first C is a credibility. If you just want to help our governments around our history, etc., you have to have a credibility, a scientific credibility. What is very important, you have to conserve our history, our tangible history, our intangible history, our historical buildings, our tradition, etc. The third C is the capacity building. And in the capacity building is also the education, how we can educate people around our history. The fourth C is the communication. You have to communicate around the powerful of our history and our culture. And the last is the community. We cannot, always working only with the government, and we go to the community when we need them, when we need a vote, when we need another thing. You have to work with the community all day long, all night long, always with the community. You have to go to the community and come back to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate this this level of action. I think this is where the truth is. Well, I have to wrap up and to thank you, all of you, our bright panelists, for this really fascinating conversation, pleading for an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage and history, shared values and ethics, and which has helped in reaffirming a Pan-African identity and ownership of its future. I have to say, listening to you, I have designed a roadmap because you had so much elements. I don't think I have the time to share it now, but we can continue outside of this conversation. And to end, I would like to quote Dr. Denis Mukwege, that you all know, who is a Nobel Prize 2018, and I had the chance to meet him during the Pan-African Forum for a Culture of Peace in Africa, which is also called the Biennale of Luanda. And I hope maybe that you could go to the second edition of this Biennale of Luanda in next October. And when I met Dr. Denis Mukwege, he said, let us draw together on our values, on our tradition, on our culture to find the path to prosperity and peace. So this is with these words I will conclude this conversation. I wish to thank again the organizers of the ADS for this unique opportunity, and let's be together to build back better after the COVID-19 pandemics. And I thank you very much for your attention and participation. Thank you to all of you. Thank you.